If democracy, as we often say rhetorically, is really central, if it were central to American education, to America, democracy was important to America, where is exactly do we think children will learn to be small d Democrats? I mean, it's worth looking around and think, is it at home? Is it in the corner grocery store? Is it on the street? Is it in the basketball court? Because I want to put it to you, it is not in our schools.
Education as a civil right is one of my passions. Certainly, I believe in education and public education as the heart of our democracy, and believe that every child should have the right to access to an adequate public education, and really believe that it should be, although it is not currently, recognized as one of our fundamental civil rights. The founders of our nation believed that the success of our democracy depended on our public schools and an educated citizenry who would understand what democracy was about, who could clearly understand political arguments, who might be able to run for office, who understood the concept of the public good and would participate actively in a democracy. So what could be more fundamental to an individual's democratic liberties than a public education?
First of all, the federal government only spends 7% of the budgets of our schools come from the federal government. 93% come from local sources. And the foundations add 0.001 to that. And that those people have such an enormous say. And their self-interest, and some of them, frankly, will even say their profits are motivating them. That's what I want us to yell about. Not about the parents who think they know better how to teach spelling than I do. Because, we've confused them over the years enough, so we can listen.
I'm Mary Claire. I'm a Madison teacher. I work at Midvale and Lincoln, coordinating the Professional Development School teacher ed program.
Ken Zeichner, professor in curriculum instruction and associate dean of the Ed School.
Erica Fidali, I'm a graduate student in educational policy studies.
Nancy Evans, principal at Wright Middle School here in Madison.
I'm watching now that No Child Left Behind is up for reauthorization next year, and people are beginning to weigh in on what should be done, and I'm a little bit concerned personally about people trying to soften it but not fundamentally change it.
So how to get into this fight? So I'm a member of something called the Forum for Education and Democracy, which Gloria Ladson-Billings and your school is on. We have a sort of small advisory board, and then try to just gather as much as we can to try to be a think tank on the other side. And one of the things, of course, was our purpose was just this, to try to help frame the other position. There are some who are sort of in the middle, as you say, but to really frame a position that this is the wrong road to be going down if we want to have a powerful impact, above all, on the education of the children who are least advantaged in our society. This is not the direction. And so that's one of the reasons for my wanting to be back in school. I always had an excuse for not putting all my energy into these losing causes, because I had all these daily responsibilities for this kid and this kid. And so if you have some good suggestions. One reason that we're filming this is we're trying to think of, we haven't got an exact plan, but she has some ideas about trying to, how to get this debate and discussion more visible to a larger public. So she's been running around the country, right? Videotape. But I think that most of the polls I've seen suggest that this notion that the public, that's the part that infuriates me, when they tell me that the public insists we do these things. Parents insist we do this thing, whether in fact, parents are the least friendly of any group to this NCLB type approach. That doesn't mean they're turned off of it entirely, but they're the least friendly. And so we get fooled into thinking, of every group in America, when asked who do you trust, of all the professions in America, teachers come out in the top. And yet we're always afraid to speak up on the grounds that they'll just think it's self-interest. And business is not afraid to speak out, even though it's self-interest. So, we have in some way silenced ourselves. And I think it's too bad. So I think we have to keep figuring out ways, letters to the editors, in which we don't get silenced in this discussion, and that some of us are also parents. So in our role as parents, we can write letters signed as a parent. I don't know, they're just finding the cracks. Writing letters to our congressmen and our legislators. They get very little mail on this. So if you wrote with concern, you can have an impact. If 50 teachers in an area write as teachers and as parents and get their neighbor and their grandmother and their aunt, you'd be surprised that it would open the door for that legislator to think this is a controversial question. And because most legislators spend their lives surrounded by the legislators and lobbyists. Yeah.
Could you talk about the role of the school administrator within NCLB? I was a school principal in LA and mandated curriculum and, from the up top, and then trying to mediate that in my own beliefs and trying to figure out what to do. I mean, I came here to try to figure out more of that, and I'm still struggling. So, but like trying to really how to, with NCLB and all the demands and all the testing and what you're told from the top, and then trying to give your teachers the ability to do what they're taught to do. And I find it really difficult to really...
I have been lucky that since I stopped being just a teacher, I have been in school situations where I had a lot of freedom. Or put it this way, I've been in school systems where I took a lot of freedom and never had to worry. So sometimes you can do more than you think you can. I always took this position with that when they threatened to fire me is when I would stop and think about whether I would say I'm sorry. And that we often self-impose censorship on ourselves for fear that someone will. How easy it has been to shut us up. That's what I feel shameful about, that we have been much too easy to shut up. The National Association for the Education of Young Children is a big organization, and I read their brochures about their annual conference. They're just about to have one in Anaheim, and I spoke last year in Chicago. And it's not that there's anything wrong with their workshop sessions. You wouldn't know by reading those things that everything they stand for is going down the drain. I mean, they have their principles in the front. It's as a community, they haven't said, this is wrong. Pediatricians have spoken out more loudly than the field of early childhood education has. And I just think you have to find 5 other principals who just can't roll over.
But I agree with you as an administrator. You jump out there and you do what you can, and what's the worst they can well, I won't say that. What's the worst I won't say that, but but if you get your hand slapped and it's like, okay, I understand. But sometimes you just have to step out there and take a chance for yourself, for your teachers, for the kids.
It's not the parents I worry about most, because even though I want you to know, I have never figured out this parent-teacher. I know that when teachers say in the answer to surveys that what they want is more parent participation, that they're lying. I'm reading a column by Jay Matthews, who writes for the the Washington Post, and he has a website, and he lists the myths about education, and one of the myths is that money matters. And I think it's part of why the assumption in NCLB that the first punishment you get is that the school uses its already reduced funds to pay for the transportation to send kids to other schools or for after-school programs. it's not as they get extra money for that. So if they have a $100 budget, whereas a school in the richer neighborhood has $300 budget, now that their test scores are low, they have to take some of that 100 for after school, some of the 100 for tutoring, some of the 100, and it can't, and the tutoring has to be from private corporations, and can't be from the school itself, and some of the 100 to bus kids to another school. And this is as a way to give them as an incentive to get their scores up. Contradictions in that bill are so ludicrous that it does lead me to believe that at least some of its supporters had no intention that this would have a positive effect, but had an intention of showing that public education is, by its nature, a bad idea and that we need a privatized marketplace. Now, I don't say that's true of all of the supporters, but I think it was a wonderful coalition of people with very different motives.
Here's something. Here's a controversial reaction to Ken's comment and some of the conversation. I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly not a hard and fast supporter of NCLB. I'm actually, and I'm someone who's been in my research following the money from public pockets into the hands of private providers. But I don't know whether it's effective for us to say we're for or against NCLB. NCLB is a complex piece of legislation. It's got a lot of contradictions, but I would argue it has some good sense in it. And that part of how we deepen the debate is by not polarizing for or against, but by talking about some of the things that I would argue are steps forward. And I guess, and it's a short list. Okay, it's a short list. But this notion of public discussion. So, one of the things would be this. Especially a big issue in Wisconsin, disaggregating student test scores, by race, ELL, special education, and so forth, has forced a lot of issues to come up at the state level. That's a good thing. That's a wise piece of the law. The part of the law that says that money has to be set aside to go to private providers and to pad those pockets, that's not. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think in part deepening the debate is, or having an effective argument moving forward towards a reauthorization is attending to those complexities. I don't know how Ken or how you folks would react to that, but that's how I'm feeling.
Well, so just tell you, my offhand response is that there's some truth to what you're saying. But there's a bill called the Clean Air Act that Bush also passed. I'm sure it has some things in it that are good. It's almost impossible to write a bill that doesn't do some good things. But mostly cut down lots of trees. It was a deforestation. So I don't know strategically whether you're right or not. It's sometimes harder to mobilize people to become experts on a bill and say something as nuanced as you're saying. But I'm sure there are some things, if they're much fewer than there are bad things. The dilemma, you're right, is they've been very clever to give a good title, just as they were with the Clean Air Act and so forth. Because you could say, surely, I agree, no child left behind. So I don't know, that's a strategic question, which I'm not sure that'd be wise, which is a wiser path. I don't think there's going to be any new, really serious reform until the next president, until 2009. And I think what I want is such a major overhaul at that time that it might as well be called a new bill. Yeah. So I think there are steps in this, and I think to build towards that, I don't want to glorify the few positive things. If you look at our schools, it is hard to believe that if that were a central purpose of education, we would have designed them the way we have. At best, we have an occasional social studies course called Democracy 101. That might make sense if democracy was a trivial and easily understood concept. But I want to contend to you, if we're serious about it, on the concept of democracy, not to mention the habits of democracy, the concept and the habits of democracy are more difficult to learn and more counterintuitive than modern advanced math physics. And all of us know how hard it is to teach physics. You know, there's all these wonderful stories about asking well-educated Harvard students to explain the seasons of the years, and they all come up with these absurd explanations that are completely sensible, though, that in the summer, the Earth is closer to the sun, and in the winter, we're farther away. In fact, I understand it's actually slightly the reverse. I won't go on with telling you, for those who are not sure, exactly why it is cold in the winter and hot in the summer, and maybe it's not very important, but it's not intuitive. The intuitive answer is when you're nearer the heat, it's warmer, and when you're farther away, it's colder. Similarly with the phases of the moon. After 3 courses with Eleanor Duckworth, I'm now convinced it is not the shadow of the Earth. But what it is, I'm still having trouble with. And I observe it quite closely, my place in the country, and I go through a whole process each time. I say to myself, the moon. Now, half the moon is lit up, even though it doesn't look that way to me. I have to start with that litany and move from there slowly through it. It's not intuitive. It's counterintuitive. And democracy is even more counterintuitive. It's not an accident that in the thousands of years of human history, there aren't many democratic models that have survived for long. I mean, we're learning this lately in some of our great adventures to bring democracy abroad, but we're learning it also in bringing democracy to our domestic experience. Our immediate instinct, faced with danger, is to abandon democracy. At heart, I think you and me are not absolutely sure that democracy works in a crisis. It's a luxury. It's a nice luxury, we think. And if possible, we should do it. But it's not good enough for our schools, for example. How many schools are there in America that operate democratically? Now, you could say it's democratic in the sense we elect someone over there, and they appoint someone here, and they appoint someone there. But that's pretty indirect for something as simple as our schooling. How many kids have ever experienced or are aware of, correctly or incorrectly, that adults have serious differences of opinion about how best to school them, how best to raise them? And that these differences need to be talked about in the public square, that they are legitimate, that they are fundamental to the improvement of education. On the whole, they are surrounded by adults who pretend that arguing about something or disagreeing about something is something that shouldn't be done in the presence of children because it's not nice. It's a little like having sex in their presence. You know, come out of the room because I want to disagree with you. You know, when I've argued with teachers at Mission Hill, I get looks from people like, don't do this right here in the office. The kids will notice. And I think that's the whole point of it. That's why we have this kind of office, so the kids will notice it. So the kids will learn from us what it's like. I'm not just talking about majority votes now, but they will learn something about the culture of a democracy in which different opinions get expressed, discussed, fought over, and resolved in one form or another, and then fought over again, renewed again another day.